Welcome to Work Comp Talk, a podcast dedicated to all of the injured workers here in the state of California. My name is Carmen, your host, and today invited as a special guest is none other than Shane McKay, who joins us from our sponsors, Pacific Workers, the Lawyers for Injured Workers. Shane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I am excited to have you on board. There's so much to learn about Shane. And first and foremost, I'm going to pick a little bit of your career. I'm going to be picking at how long you've been practicing workers' compensation for. So I do know you were born and raised in Seattle, Washington. And of course, you decided to go into the legal field. How long have you been practicing?
Practicing since 2005.
Wow, that's a good amount of time. What made you go into the legal field in particular for the workers' comp side?
To attack insurance companies.
In any particular way possible? Was it something that really got you upset or?
No, the workers' compensation field was I started out in criminal defense.
Okay.
And that's what I was doing initially. I was a public defender. I moved to the Bay Area and got into workers' compensation. From there, I started out on the defense side because that's the entree. You learn the way it's done over there. And when I came over here to Pacific Workers, it was specifically because I wanted to go after insurance companies.
So when you were on the defense side, is there anything in particular that really upset you, knowing certain aspects that they do, certain tricks perhaps?
Yeah, just about everything that they did upset me, unless they were super straightforward, which some of them were, some more than others. But in general, it was about the bottom line and not about the people. Workers' compensation is supposed to be about providing benefits to injured workers. It's supposed to be a no-fault system. It's supposed to be something that people can just claim and feel safe, feel like they can continue to maintain their lives and get medical treatment and return to their job. Or if they can't return to their job, do something else. It's quite frankly inadequate, as so many things are. We live in a very expensive,
Tell me about
very
it.
sick society, and to navigate that as a worker, you've got to go through workers' compensation if you get hurt. So what I saw on the other side, what can I say? I saw them paying for box seats at really expensive stadiums and throwing parties to attract business when that money could have been going to an injured worker.
Wow.
Um,
Those are some strong words right there and some strong facts.
So I'm not going to go into details of places where I used to work or specific cases, but I'll say that I felt much of the resources of the system on the insurance side were mismanaged and not going to the workers. So when I met Bilal one day, my boss, I was talking to him about my feelings, and he offered essentially a job, and I thought that's the side I want to be on.
Right. So he invited you to come to the good side of the entire workers' comp side.
That's what he said. That's actually what he said. He said, "You want to come to the good side."
That's so cool. I'm excited to have you on the good side. Of course, you're an amazing advocate for injured workers, not to mention one of the specialties that you have, which is taking on some of the firefighter cases. As some of you guys know, firefighters face a lot during their work, you know, when they're in the field, when they're out fighting all these brush fires or house fires, and they put their lives at risk. They truly do. So I'm going to be picking your brain a little bit, Shane, in this podcast, because it's going to essentially be dedicated to our heroes, you know, our firefighters locally here in the Bay Area, as long as even as along with the first responders, and you know, just in general, what California does for the firefighters as well, within the workers' comp, of course, what it looks like for injury claims, what some of these benefits look like for them, and most importantly, their legal rights, which is, I think, one of the most asked and sought questions when it comes to workers' compensation. So let's start right off the bat. What are some of the most common injuries that you see the firefighters face when they're in the workers' comp system?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned fires, forest fires, brush fires. That's not all that they do, not in the cities. You
That's
mentioned
true.
first responding. Many of them are going to urban locales. They're going to tragedies of all sorts. And while not the most common, a very common injury is actually PTSD.
Wow. Really? I would think you were going to say something along the lines of, you know, burns, scrapes. I don't know. A branch fell, hit them on the head, a roof fell on them.
Well, first of all, I get involved when something goes wrong, when
Mm-hmm.
someone feels like something something needs to be done where the insurance company is not treating the person the way that they feel they ought to be treated. If
Which happens
everything's
a lot.
going right, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
exactly. I have a feeling that there's a lot more smoke inhalation, burn, um, injuries that I don't see because they're obvious. Um, the insurance knows they have to treat it. The person's off for a very short period of time for the specific treatment, and then they go right back to work.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, where I see the cases, and when I get heavily involved, is when they're not being taken at face value. They're not being given the treatment that they deserve. So that's one of the reasons why I mentioned PTSD. Um, although caveat, PTSD is, and I believe we're going to be getting into it, it's a presumptive injury for firefighters. We can talk about presumptions, what that means, but it's only a presumptive injury until 2029.
Interesting.
So it will no longer be a presumptive injury. It will be automatically repealed unless the unions, um, advocates for firefighters like Pacific Workers, influence the legislature and maintain that presumption.
I would hope so. And I'm glad you brought up the word presumptions, because that was going to be my second question for you, which was, are there any specific legal protections, benefits that apply exclusively to firefighters or first responders that fall into the category of workers' compensation?
If you include police officers and correction officers in that, um, there are other people that benefit from some of these presumptions and some of these benefits that I'm about to list. But for my firefighter people, they're interested in initially, there's a benefit in workers' compensation called temporary total disability. It's one of the three catch-all benefits. There's
Mm-hmm.
temporary total disability. There's permanent disability after a person is stable, not when they're healed, but when they're stable, meaning
Mm-hmm.
unlikely to change in a year. And then there's the medical care, which will continue as long as their case is open, or that right can be sold, for example, if a person leaves a job. But the firefighters have access to, instead of temporary disability, which is capped at approximately $1,600 a week, they get salary continuation for a year. For many
Meaning they respect what they make and they continue to get that payment for an entire 12 months.
Correct. Outside of overtime. But yes.
Interesting. Which is better than being capped at $1,600.
Correct. It's oftentimes a lot better.
Yeah.
And it's a very sought after benefit, something that they like to know about or want me to advocate for if they're not getting.
Now, what are the chances of a firefighter actually only being in the system for 12 months?
It's probably the bulk of the cases. Like I said, there's a lot of cases that I don't see.
Right.
People are treated well often. Insurance system does work often. We see the cases where it's not working.
Okay.
Or where it's not working to the client's satisfaction. So,
I mean, I'm assuming there's a ton of injuries within the firefighter industry. I was reading I think it was back in 2022 that they had estimated from how they have the firefighter website and the National Fire Protection and all that, the NFPA, if I'm not mistaken, those are the acronyms for it. They had said that there was an estimated 64,000 firefighter injuries just in the year 2022. And I'm just like, that's significant. That's a huge number. And
I wouldn't be surprised at all. It's a hard job.
It is. It truly is. And I'm also assuming that given the fact that we're in California and we are a fire state and there's constantly things happening, you've mentioned it, the stress that we live in just to be able to pay our rent and stuff. And they're just going at it at work, seeing a lot of different things that we're learning, that they don't just handle fires. Can take a toll on them. And I can almost guarantee that that number has grown since 2022.
Yeah, it's, to move off of things like PTSD, which I wanted to highlight because a lot of people either are unaware of it or are ashamed of experiencing it or don't know what they're experiencing. We see knees and lower backs. And, for example, returning to your question, how long would they be expected to be off? Well,
yeah,
with a knee, they get diagnosis. Maybe they need an arthroscopic surgery. That can be done relatively quickly. The recovery time can be relatively fast. Maybe if they're having problems, one of the reasons that they might come to us is they're not getting an MRI when they want to get an MRI, right? So they languish for a month or two, just off work resting. They want to get their diagnoses. They want to get their diagnostic testing done. They come to us. They finally get it. Then they go to a specialist who might recommend a surgery, in which case it might be 2 to 3 months to diagnosis and recommendation, and then another 1 to 2 months for authorization, and then maybe 4 to 6 months for recovery. So it can be done inside of a year easily, even with a fairly significant injury.
Okay, that makes sense. I'm glad you brought this up. It was going to be another one of my questions, which is essentially the challenges that they face when they file a workers' comp case. How do they overcome these obstacles if they decide to kind of navigate the system on their own? Does it just complicate things for them?
Well, they have a strong union, and the union can oftentimes help them through. They can navigate it on their own. Like I said, I see it when it gets difficult. And they can navigate the system on their own just fine often. But there are benefits to getting someone to navigate it for them. We know the doctors is one of the things. And if you just go to any old doctor, you might get a very conservative doctor, as we call them. These people want you to go in, get themselves paid for a surgery, and then say that you're all better. And oftentimes you're not all better. And if they say that kind of thing, then you'll lose what little compensation you can get in terms of permanent disability. Sometimes they'll return you to work before you're ready. Like I said, it might be within a year. A doctor might send you back after 3 months of recuperation before you get all of your physical therapy.
Yikes.
So you might want to go to another doctor. You have the right to go to another doctor. Your union can also point that out to you. But having someone who knows the doctors and will send you to a new doctor if you're not getting the results that you want from one, will enable you to take the time you need to heal. And
Right.
we'll fight through the delays and denials for authorization, for example, with physical therapy, or for physical therapy with a practitioner that you actually like, that's actually helping. So I believe I answered most of that question.
Yeah, no, you totally did, and a little some. My next question to you, Shane, is going to be, especially given these conditions like cancer that they could essentially be exposed to, and that PTSD that you also mentioned, what are some of the tips that you can provide as far as like properly documenting some of these things within a claim so that it is covered by workers' comp? I'm assuming, firefighters, they know how to do their job, but when it comes to these little tricks and tips that, can happen within the system, is there anything you can share in regards to what they can do to better protect themselves?
So initially, I'll answer a portion of that question that wasn't asked, which is cancer, for example, is one of the presumptions. We brought up presumptions previously. What presumptions are is in workers' compensation, the general state of the law is if you claim an injury, it is then your burden to prove that the injury actually happened at work, and caused need for treatment. The presumptions will flip the burden. It is then on the defense to say that it didn't happen, or didn't happen at work, or there is no injury. And it's really important for something like cancer. So cancer would be one of those injuries where you might not know about it for a very long time.
It's
the
so
simple
silent.
answer to your original question is talk to your doctor as soon as you know that you have something that was caused by work. Tell your supervisor, and they'll fill out a DWC-1 claim form. But for something like cancer, that's not going to happen. You're not going to know. Something will be going wrong. You'll be getting testing, and then eventually you'll find out that you have cancer, but you won't know what caused it.
Right.
And that's why the presumption is so important, and that's why it was fought for, and the legislature passed it, because firefighters are being constantly exposed to carcinogenic substances, not just smoke. So they're sent into all sorts of situations where things that are supposed to be contained are no longer contained. They're ripped open or burnt up and dispersed, and the firefighters are exposed to them. And for this reason, cancer is presumed to have been caused by the work. In terms of tips or ways to deal with not getting hurt, don't pretend to be your own doctor. Don't be overly macho. So don't say, I know how this happened. That's ultimately an opinion that the judges that will make a decision on your case will rely on a doctor for. If you say it, you might be wrong, and that can work against you. So you go into a doctor, you get a doctor's opinion. And in terms of don't be overly macho, what I mean by that is a lot of people will say, for example, oh, that's nothing,
Brush it
brush it
off.
off.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not the time to be super strong when you're dealing with whether or not you're going to get your benefits. You can continue to be strong and go back to work and work through pain, but you've got to tell somebody. You've got to tell somebody that it happened. You've got to tell somebody how it's impacting you, and you've got to ask for help. And that's another place where we come in, especially if you don't want to be the one complaining directly. We can complain for you.
Okay, that's good to know. You mentioned earlier, some of the benefits that are only for firefighters and certain, obviously, trades within our workforces, firefighters, police officers, first responders. And they have this, opportunity to continue to make the same money that they were officially making as if they were working. And what happens if that injury that you are facing puts you out longer than that year?
The year covered under Labor Code Section 4850.
Yeah.
That's the Labor Code section that supports the salary continuation. And there are caveats. I mentioned overtime. If you had been working a large amount of overtime and that's not part of your base salary, that's not necessarily going to be part of the continuation. But we can check and see. We'll see what we can get. But if it keeps you out longer than the year, then workers' compensation has a standard 2 years of wage replacement. It's not salary continuation. It's temporary total disability, it's called, and you get 104 weeks of it. They don't have to be one block. It doesn't have to be 2 years straight. It can be broken up over time. But it's capped at approximately $1,600 a week. So you go from your Labor Code 4850 to your temporary disability benefit. Together, those two things will cover a year or 2 years.
Okay. So you start off with, continuation of your salary and then jump into, what essentially any other worker would be entitled to, which is a life-changing experience for someone who's making more than $1,600 a month. It changes your lifestyle, your household income.
Yeah, it does. And which is why many people kind of want to rush through and make sure that they deal with what they deal with during their 4850 time. And some of them will even use their vacation time and sick time to fill the gap. And, I have not many nice things to say about insurance companies, but I will say that the approach to firefighters is a little bit more open.
I was hoping you were going to say the word serious.
They tend to believe firefighters more because of what you're mentioning. It's a rough job. There's many legitimate injuries. So the
it's either that or they're hoping that they won't need their service one day and that one person they denied shows up to their door and's like, hey, I'm just kidding. It's me taking it to the next level.
I hope they think along those lines. I hope that they realize that the people, that the insurance adjusters and the insurance companies realize that the people that they're dealing with are the people that they depend on. I hope they think that way. I hope they don't feel fearful, but I hope that they think about the people behind the benefits that they're supposed to be giving them.
Right. What are some of the expectations a firefighter can essentially expect when they are in the settlement process of a workers' compensation claim? Like, what does that look like for them?
There's a couple of different standard settlements in workers' compensation, and one of them, called stipulations with request for award, is they get their temporary disability, and then after that period is over, or their wage continuation, after that period is over, when a doctor says that they're stable, which, as I said before, does not mean that they're healed. It just means they're unlikely to change for a year. Okay. After that, they get permanent disability. And that's the award that they're talking about in stipulations with request for award. And that's basically a percentage that means money.
Mm-hmm.
It's an award that is made based on numbers that a doctor will assign to the injured individual. I could go into detail, but I don't think that's the place for this here. Permanent disability is what you get at the end of a case during settlement if you're doing stipulations with request for award. You would have already gotten your temporary disability, then you're getting your permanent disability. And in that case, usually you stay at the job and you keep your right to medical care through workers' compensation, which is frequently frustrating. I shouldn't say keep your right to it. You're forced to continue to get it. But the other form of settlement is called a compromise and release. And in this case, even if you haven't used up all of your temporary disability, you get your permanent disability, either assigned by a judge or after calculation based on a doctor's findings, or estimated based on what we see in your medical reporting, along with any money that we would expect you to additionally be given in temporary disability, and the value of your medical care. So we estimate the value of your medical care and we reduce that to a number 2. Those 3 numbers are added up essentially, and you close the entire case. Now, that's something for the end of your working life as a firefighter, usually.
So usually like when you're getting ready to kind of retire, when you're set, you're done. Okay.
Correct. It's most of my firefighters want to go back to work. So the insurance companies don't want to settle their entire case and say they hurt their knee, right?
Mm-hmm.
Say they hurt their knee, they used up 1 year of 4850 time, they got a dollar amount for the permanent disability value of their knee, and they have the right to medical care. Well, if they return to work, they could very easily hurt that knee again.
Yeah.
If the insurance company pays out the value of the future medical care of that knee, then they would have paid that out and then additionally assumed the responsibility of paying for that knee again when the person returns to work if they injure themselves again. So they don't tend to want to do that. So you don't generally compromise and release while you're still at work. But if you're ready to leave work, you can do that second kind of settlement that I just talked about, compromise and release.
Interesting. Yeah. What are some of the areas where they can't, there's certain things in workers' comp that kind of overlap with benefits, whether that's through a firefighter or an injured worker that is essentially non-firefighter, warehouse workers, healthcare workers, etc. What are some of the differences for firefighters in general in regards to no double dipping? Like, what would be some of those things that they can like essentially, I don't know, double dip somewhere?
Okay, so the 4850 pay that I was talking about, that would be an example of that. You don't get your wage continuation and 2 years of temporary total disability. You would get, essentially, the insurance company would get to take credit for 1 year of temporary total disability based on the 1 year of Labor Code Section 4850 pay.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing would be retirement. When you retire, if, for example, you have industrial disability retirement, they don't want to pay you out for your medical care and your retirement pay, as well as give you permanent disability and what's left of your 4850, for example, if you haven't paid it all out. Right? Because they're paying you for being disabled in your retirement. So double dipping does come up a lot in the context of how much time can I get paid for being off work when I plan to return, and how much money can I get maximum, basically, to retire, especially when I retire disabled.
Interesting. Well, those are very, very great informative tips, if you would call them, for any firefighter that's essentially in the, I guess, I wouldn't say bad area of the workers' comp claim. Like if someone got injured, they're not all bad cases. They're not all horrible stories. Sometimes the system allows you to kind of flow through it easily. But for those that end up with someone like Shane advocating for their rights, obviously there's that type of information that we've just shared, and I hope they learn something from it. I'm assuming all firefighters kind of know the system a little bit. They know how the ins and outs of it
They're
works.
generally sophisticated characters. They're some of my more sophisticated clients.
Amazing to know. Good for the firefighters.
I want to say this. There's always some benefit to getting an attorney, right?
Of course, the 30% more on your settlement regardless, just by hiring an attorney.
So obviously no guarantees, but generally you do better. It offsets the fees. We don't take fees on your labor code 4850. So if you're off work and you're getting wage continuation or temporary disability, that's not part of our fee structure unless we have to go litigate it. But it's just the permanent disability, unless we go on to a compromise and release. So when you look at just the value of the permanent disability in the case of a stipulation with request for award, it generally behooves you to get someone who knows the doctors and can argue with the doctors if they come up with, they hallucinate facts and decide.
You mean if they come up with all these bogus excuses?
If the doctors are saying things that are wrong, then we can correct them. And before that even happens, if the insurance is trying to shunt you to a doctor that's going to give you the most conservative outlook on what you deserve, we can help you. That's, I think, where the idea of the increased value comes from.
Agreed.
There's also just the not having to think about it, not having to look at every, study every piece of mail that comes into your mailbox. You can ask us, we'll tell you what it means, and we'll navigate the system with you and for you.
Yeah. And that also includes finding those appointments for these clinics that are super really just saturated sometimes, and the availability is not as easy. You have to constantly be making all these phone calls if things do get complicated, not to mention the stress of all the added paperwork that needs to happen. So yeah, I guess if you put it that way, Shane, there is a huge benefit to it.
Oh, there's a huge benefit. And the doctors, oftentimes, especially with established communities, they'll have doctors that they go to, but the doctors retire. And when it's time to find a new doctor, or if one doctor isn't doing it for you, we can be there to help you for that too.
That is great to know. Well, if you haven't hit that subscribe button yet, make sure you do so now. That way you get notified every time we upload new content to this podcast. If you haven't had the opportunity to share this with someone who you might think benefit from these tips, I would highly encourage you to do so now. And if you have any comments, if you're a firefighter, if there's anything you'd like for Shane to address, I'd be more than happy to bombard him as well with questions and have him answer them later. So we do encourage comments on this podcast. podcast as well. So I want to thank you, Shane, for your time. I'm sorry I had to pull you out earlier from fighting for all these injured workers. I do know you just dealt with 2 depositions, which is not the best to do right before you do a podcast. So I appreciate your time, Shane, and I hope to have you back on the podcast soon. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much, Carmen.